Welcome to Dying Isn't Romantic, where we get real about living with dying. I'm your host, Dina Hamilton. In episode 3, The Life of a Caregiver, we'll be talking a little bit about the lessons I've learned about caregiving. Let me start off by saying I am not at all new to the role of caregiver. It is a role I've stepped into many other times in different capacities, including my oldest daughter, who at age 12 had her first stroke, and age 15 had her second stroke and major brain surgery. She would be diagnosed with cavernous hemangiomas of the brain, which entailed a lot of doctor and hospital visits and a lot of really scary moments. Thankfully, she is a grown woman now and doing well. And this brings us to our first lesson. No two situations are alike. As caregivers, we cannot let ourselves fall into that trap of thinking that this is not my first rodeo, so everything will be fine. Each time we step into a new caregiver role, we will be dealing with a new patient-caregiver relationship dynamic, new personalities, and a whole new set of circumstances. Therefore, we must step into the role with a fresh set of eyes and an open mind. What was appropriate for my teenage daughter who was ill may not and most likely won't be appropriate in dealing with my husband who is ill. And that brings up another point. Caregiving, unless you're doing it on a professional basis, is not a job. It's a relationship. It goes far beyond medications and doctor's appointments, running errands, and helping with daily needs. As caregivers, we are providing not only physical support to those we care for, but emotional support as well. And we are emotionally invested in their care and their lives. We are there for all of their ups and downs, and in many cases, we will be there for their very last moments on earth. It is a huge and sometimes daunting responsibility. It is a sacred trust that should never be taken lightly. One thing that's key to a good caregiver-patient relationship is to learn to keep things in perspective. Hey, it says it right there in our title, Dying Isn't Romantic. There may be times when the person you're caring for is difficult, as they're dealing with pain and with uncertainty and a whole jumble of emotions. These are the times when you need to take a mental step back and realize, first of all, it's not about you, and then consider what they're going through. Facing the possibility of death is never easy, and it can be emotionally messy, not to mention the emotional and behavioral side effects of many medications. This is also a good opportunity to shift your perspective a little bit and consider what an honor it is that you are trusted with emotions that a lot of these people are afraid to share with anyone else. Just as patients can have their difficult moments, sometimes we as caregivers can have our times when we're not exactly those angels of light and mercy. You will get tired, you will get frustrated, and at times you will let your emotions get the best of you. This in no way means you're a bad person. It simply means that you are human. At these times, we need to do our best not to let our mood affect the way we care for our patient or relate to our patient. When you do have those moments of sharpness or impatience, one of the most valuable tools for a caregiver is the phrase, "I'm sorry." In those two simple words, we're expressing both the patient's value and our humanity. Communication is another key component to the caregiver-patient relationship. When possible, open and honest communication can build rapport between the patient and the caregiver. This can be a big help in helping caregivers be more attuned to their patients' needs and more intuitive in their care. It can also help the patient to be more relaxed and comfortable in our care. I do realize that for a myriad of reasons, sometimes verbal communication is just not going to be possible. First off, remember we as caregivers, regardless of the state of the patient, are still able to communicate verbally, through body language, and through our general demeanor. I am by no means indicating that a nonverbal patient is incapable of communicating. As caregivers, we should strive to learn the language of our patients, verbal or nonverbal. It can be anything from body language, moods, sounds. Just take the time to learn your patient. Probably one of the biggest and most important lessons in the role of a caregiver is the need for self-care. This is one area where that old saying, you can't take care of anyone else if you don't take care of yourself, really rings true. There are many components to self-care, and I'll be honest here, I still struggle with many of them. The first and most basic components of self-care for a caregiver are simple. Eat, drink, sleep. Proper nutrition, hydration, and rest can go a very long way in helping with stamina, mental acuity, and mood. A lesser-known element of self-care for caregivers is don't get caught up in the comparison game. You need to hear me loud and clear here. There are no perfect caregivers. This one can be a two-way street. Just as you should not be beating yourself up because Susie Jones down the street always looks perfect, has a smile on her face, and you feel like you're a mess. You also shouldn't be judging John from work who comes in disheveled and grumpy after a long night of caring for his wife with dementia. If anything, we as caregivers need to be supporting one another and learning from one another and respecting each other's journeys. We also need to understand that being a caregiver is not and should never be our total identity. Whenever possible, try to find time to engage in those activities that make you, you. Whether that be watching a favorite television show, reading a book, spending time in nature, engaging in a hobby. Just take care of the you that's still in there. We do ourselves and our patient a disservice by getting so caught up in our role as caregiver that we lose who we are. To be honest, the area I struggle most with is probably the most vital and most difficult area of self-care for a caregiver: human interaction. For me, it's difficult because I'm an introvert, so I naturally, even in the best of times, tend to shun social interaction and push people away and isolate. However, even the social butterflies amongst caregivers struggle with this area. There are so many reasons for this. Things as simple as time constraints and fatigue. Or it could be the notion that no one really cares or understands what we're going through. Let me assure you, you are not an island. There are people out there that do care and that do understand. Even if you're not up to the big social events right now, or can't deal with large gatherings, try and find a friend or a family member that you feel comfortable talking to. And or seek professional counseling. It can really do wonders. And if you know someone that's a caregiver, Consider being a support person in their life. That role can be as big or as small as you and the caregiver are comfortable with. Text them to see how their day is going. Invite them out for a coffee or lunch or whatever activity you think you and they would enjoy. When you do spend time with a caregiver, however, listen. Don't dominate the conversation. It's not about you. Let them guide the conversation. Look for cues. Sometimes if they're really quiet, sometimes they just want to listen to you. If that's the case, don't use this as an opportunity to discuss your problems unless they specifically ask. Another way you can support caregivers is by acts of service. This can be watching their children while they get some rest, cooking them a meal, or cleaning their house. Just be sure to communicate, because while caregivers are willing to take on the burden of someone else, they are very self-conscious about being a burden to others. The final lesson I'll be talking about is the greatest lesson any caregiver could ever learn. It is simply that despite the hardships, and it is a hard job, despite the sleepless nights, despite the worries, despite any negative thing that comes with this job, it is the greatest job on earth. Before I close, I want to reach out to my fellow caregivers and let you know that you are not alone and you are appreciated. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you. Be sure to stop by the website, www.dyingisn'tromantic.com, and leave a comment or send an email. Until next time, this has been Dina Hamilton with Dying Isn't Romantic.
You've been listening to Dying Isn't Romantic with Dina Hamilton. If you're finding it hard to cope mentally or emotionally, please reach out to your primary care physician for a referral to a mental health professional, or reach out to your faith leader for counseling if you are more comfortable. If you're having thoughts of suicide or self-harming, please call the National Suicide Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. This is Ray Hamilton. Please join Dina the next time for another episode of Dying Isn't Romantic.